English. Both the flowers shall be lost too late, against the law the serpent will do nothing, the forces of the leaguers by gallops shall be confounded, Savone, Albingi, by monarch shall suffer great pain. Not. The two first verses are too mystical for me, the third signifieth, that by gallops, that is, by troops of horses, the leaguers, viz. those that held the party of the league, shall be routed by the king's cavalry. The fourth, that Savone and Albingi, two towns of the Genoese, shall be put to much trouble by those of Monac and Monaco, another town near them, belonging to the Prince of Monaco, a Genoese of the house of Grimoald. English. The lady shall be left to reign alone, the only one being extinguished, first in the bed of honor, 7 years she shall weep for grief, after that she shall live long in the reign by good luck. Not. The second and fourth verses persuade me that this stanza came to pass in the time of Catherine of Medicis, wife to Henry II. Because she lived long, and the king died in the bed of honor, and thus he saith, that she was left to reign alone, because her 4 sons were all little ones, so that she alone was regent in France. The second verse saith, the Holy One being extinguished, first, in the bed of honor. By this word, the only one, the author meaneth not the only son, but the only one living, such as Henry II. Was to her, who was extinguished in the bed of honor, and died of the wound he received at tilting. The third verse saith, that after his death, her mourning lasted 7 years, that is, from the 1st of August 1559 to the 1st of August 1566. Because that all those 16 months that Francis too. She had nothing but continual sorrow, by the conspiracy of Amboise, the secret practices of the King of Navarre, and Prince of Condé his brother, by the insurrection of the Protestants, when Charles IX. visited his kingdom, anno 1556. After which she put off her mourning. The fourth verse signifieth, that she should be long-lived, for she lived above 60 years, he saith also, that she was regent by great luck, that is, great luck for herself, but not for the kingdom, for it was most unhappy in her time. English. No agreement shall be kept, all those that shall admit of it deal falsely, there shall be protestations made by land and sea, Barcelona shall take a fleet by craft. Not. This is a description of the sad and calamitous estate of France, in the time of the civil wars, when no agreement could be kept on the Roman Catholic side, witness the several pieces that were made and broken, the massacre of Vassa, and that infamous perfidy committed by them on St. Bartholomew's Day, being the 24th of August, anno 1572. English. Between the grey and sad grey shall be half open war, by night they shall be assaulted and plundered, the sad grey being taken, shall be put in custody, his temple shall be open, 2 shall be put in the grate. Not. This stanza affordeth us a comical history, which is, that about the year 1601. When there sprang up in France a kind of friars, who bossed themselves to be the true observers of the rule of St. Francis, and that the Cordeliers and Capuchins did not keep it so exactly, but they had need of a great reformation, the King Henry IV. granted them a convent at Beaufort, and upon his example many other places desired them. They went to possess themselves of the house of La Blamet, near Angers, but the Cordeliers being loath to be dispossessed by these newcomers, called Recollets, did besiege them by main force, broke open the gates, scaled the walls. The besieged did not defend themselves by words or exorcisms, but with good stones and flints, so that if the people had not come, the fray would not have ended without murder. Some of them were put in prison, others kept in custody. This is the meaning of the author, when he saith, there will be half an open war between the grey and the sad grey, for the Cordeliers have a grey habit, and the Recollets a sad grey. English. At the foundation of a new sect, the bones of the great Roman shall be found, the sepulchre shall appear covered with marble, the earth shall quake in April, they shall be ill buried. Not. The meaning is, that when they shall go about to make a foundation of a house, for a new sect of friars, they shall find the bones of a famous Roman in a marble sepulchre, and that in April the earth shall quake, whereby many shall be swallowed up. English. To the great empire quite another shall come, being farther from goodness and happiness, governed by one of base parentage, the kingdom shall fall, a great unhappiness. Not. This needeth no interpretation. English. When the seditious fury of the soldiers against their chief shall make the iron shine by night, the enemy D'Alba shall by a furious hand then vex Rome, and seduce the principal one. Not. The Lord thou doth judiciously observe, that the Pope being unacquainted with things belonging to war, as to money, victuals, and ammunition, was easily persuaded by Cardinal Carafa to make war against Spain, for without being provided of all these things, he put his armies into the field, nec satis perpendens quam a pecunia. Melita ac caterus rebus ad bellum necessarius imperatus intempestive arma sumerit. In the 15th book of his history, the Duke of Bourbon had commissioned to raise 6,000 foot and 300 horses in the dukedom of Spoleto and in Mark of Ancona. John Carafa, the Pope's nephew, was made general of the army, and being but Earl of Mortar, was created Duke of Paliano by the confiscation of the goods of Mark Antony Colonna. Camillo Orsini was made general of the forces in Rome, and in the territory thereof, Blasius of Montluc, the Mars of his time, and by birth a Gascon, was sent by the king to help, with his advice and courage, the Romans, who are always fitter for the breviary than for the sword. Besides these forces raised within the church dominions, Charles Carafa gathered all the bandittes of Naples and Florence, and raised some regiments of Switzers that came to succor the Pope. With these troops the Pope seized upon the most important places and persons belonging to the Spanish party, as the Colonneses and the Vitali. These asked succors of the Emperor Charles V, who presently commanded Ferdinand of Toledo, Duke of Alba, to succor them. He was then tasked in the Piedmont and Milanese to resist the French that were then under the conduct of the Marshal of Brissac. To conclude his design the better, he wrote many letters to the Pope and the College of Cardinals, full of respect and submission, desiring them to moderate their passion against the Spanish party, but the Pope, being angry by several reports, answered him, complaining of many things, which made the Duke resolve to the war, and to be there in person. He took his occasion as a prudent captain, when the news was brought to him that the Pope's forces were in mutiny against their general for want of pay, and made a great tumult in the night, hearing that he was approaching with a great train of artillery. Xovius saith, that the Earl of Montier regarded more his profit than the Pope's interest, and kept back a great part of the money that was to pay the soldiers, whence proceeded this tumult, which helped much the Duke of Alva's business. This is the explanation of the two first verses of this stanza, concerning the mutiny of the soldiers that were in the Pope's service, during which mutiny the enemy D'Alba did not fail to vex Rome. This word the enemy D'Alba doth not signify the enemy of the Duke of Alba, as if one should say in Latine hostis Albanus. He did then vex Rome, for in a short time he took Ponte Corvino, Fresino Anagnia, Marino, Lavasi, Proeneste, Tivoli, Ostia, Neptuno, Alba Vicovaro, Montefortino, and almost all the places of the Roman territory. This did straiten Rome so much, that the general Camillo Orsini made several trenches within the walls of Rome, instead of preserving the outworks, as Montluc would have persuaded him to do. The alarums were so great at Rome, that Montluc was fain to encourage the Romans, and to make a warlike speech to them, which is inserted in his works. Moreover, the same duke began to seduce the principals of Rome by his friends that he had in it, but particularly by the cheat that he put upon the Pope, for his design being to prevent the French forces, and to surprise the Pope. He resolved to go straight to Rome, and to bring his design the better to pass, he sent Pyrrhus Coffrid to the Pope, to see if there was any way of agreement, to the end that upon this proposition the Pope should mistrust nothing. In the meantime the Duke of Alba was coming near Rome, at which the Pope was so angry, that he put this ambassador in prison, where he was kept till the conclusion of the peace. In this sort were the principal men of Rome seduced, having no thought of the Spaniards' approaches. This is the relation of the Lord de thou, lib 16. English. What a great pity will it be ere long, those that did give shall be constrained to receive, naked, famished with cold, thirst, to mutiny, to go over the mountains making great disorders. Not. The words of the first verse, before it be long, is the key of the stanza, because we infer from thence it was shortly to happen, as in truth it did at the latter end of the year 1556. When the Duke of Guise came into Piedmont to join with the Marshal of Brissac. Then the troops of the Marshal, seeing those of the Duke better paid than they were, forsook the Marshal. The history saith there was above 1,500. of them, and that the marshal paid the soldiers of his own money to stay them. The great pity was, when he had no more to give, he was compelled by the king's order itself, and against his own inclination, to raise some moneys upon the countries. Secondly, to take some towns and give the plunder to the soldiers. Thirdly, to permit the soldiers to pillage the country. The author was willing to foretell this, because there was never a man more strict in keeping the martial discipline than this general was. The Marshal of Brissac being thus abused, some of his troops forsook him to follow the Duke of Guise, being for the most part naked and starved with cold, hunger, and thirst, which makes the author to specify hunger, cold and thirst. Want having compelled them to disband, they went over the mountains, not of Piedmont, but the Apennines of Montserrat, and whatsoever thing they found was a fish for their net. English. A chief of the world, the great Chiron shall be, moreover, beloved afterwards, feared, dreaded. His fame and praise shall go beyond the heavens, and shall be contented with the only title of victor. Not. We have said already before, that the author by the word Chiron meaneth Henry II. His master, by transposition of letters, who as he saith was contented with the bare title of victorier, when he had undertaken the protection of the German princes against the Emperor Charles V. English. When they shall come to celebrate the obsequies of the great king, a day before he be quite dead, he shall be seen presently to be allied with eagles, lions, crosses, crowns of rue. Not. In the general peace made anno 1559. 2 marriages were concluded, one of Elizabeth of France, daughter to Henry II, King of France, with Philip II, King of Spain, which was celebrated at Paris with an extraordinary magnificence, in the presence of the Duke of Alba, the Prince of Orange, and the Earl of Egmont, who came to fetch the princess. In the celebrating of these nuptials happened the unfortunate death of Henry II. This brought such a sadness to the court, that the second match, which was between Margaret of France, daughter to Francis I, and the Duke of Savoy, was celebrated without solemnity. We must add to this, that the Duke weareth in his coat of arms some eagles, some lions, some crosses, and a crown of rue. By this, we understand this stanza, which saith, that the king being mortally wounded, every one was preparing himself to render him the last duties, which the author calleth to parenti, from the Latine word parentar, which signifieth to celebrate the funeral duties of a man. Thus the second verse saith, before the day that he yieldeth up his soul, in hast was the marriage celebrated, between the Lady Margaret of France, and the Duke of Savoy, who beareth for his arms some eagles, some lions, some crosses, and a crown of rue. English. By a faint fury of divine inspiration, the wife of the Great One shall be ravished. Judges willing to condemn such a doctrine, a victimo shall be sacrificed to the ignorant people. Not. Of this fact and others as bad, have been seen strange examples, formerly done by those called enthusiasts, who have committed horrible villainies, under pretence of divine inspiration, some committing incests, others rapes, others murders, as may be seen at large in the history of John de Leyden, and other desperate Anabaptists, too tedious to be inserted here. I shall only relate here a little remarkable history, in confirmation of this, to discover the wiles of the spirits of error. Transformed into an angel of light. The 7th day of February 1526. 2 brothers, Thomas and Leonard Schuyker, living near the town of St. Gall in Switzerland, did assemble together with some other Anabaptists, in their father's house, where they passed the most part of the night in discourses, making of faces, and relating of visions, which every one said he had seen. The next day, upon break of day, Thomas did lay hold on his brother Leonard, and dragged him in the middle of the company, bid him kneel in the presence of his father and mother, and of all the rest there present, and as all the rest of the company bid him take heed to do anything amiss, he answered, that there was no need to fear, and that in this business, nothing could be done against the will of the Father. Thereupon he drew his sword, and cut off the head of his brother, who was on his knees, all besotted before this murderer. All the rest being astonished, and besides their wits for this furious blow, and lamenting the dead, Thomas ran towards the town with a fearful countenance, as a fanatic besides himself, without shoes, and having no clothes but his shirt and breeches. At that time the burgmaster of St. Gall was Joachim Vadian, a wise and learned person, before whom the said Thomas stood, crying aloud with a fearful countenance that the day of judgment was near, saying besides, that strange things had come to pass, without telling what, that the will of his father was done for his part. The burgmaster, after he had reprehended him very much for his madness and insolent carriage, commanded a cloak to be put upon him, and to lead him home softly back again. But in the meantime, news was brought of his detestable murder, whereupon he was apprehended, examined, convicted, and executed. The like hath been done many times for rapes and incests. What is particular here is, that our author saith, that the judges being willing to punish such felonies, yet that unhappy accident shall fall, that an innocent person shall be put to death, belike, instead of the guilty, to please the people. English. In a great city a monk and an artificer, dwelling near the gate and the walls, near an old woman, 'tis a secret saying cave, a treason shall be plotted under pretence of a marriage. Not. Pardon mocketh mention, that in the year 1552, a monk deceived the Marshal of Brissac, making him believe that he would put him in possession of the town of Quizres, if he would give him so much for reward. The marshal used all the caution possible not to be deceived by that impostor, who took money on both sides, viz. the French and the Spaniards. Nevertheless, the monk plied the knave with him, and the undertakings proved prejudicial to the French, though not considerably by reason of the precaution of the said marshal. The same author writes, that in the year 1555, the 17th of August, the Spaniard had designed to retake Cazal, the same way that the French had surprised it. First, they had got a widow in the town, who received the undertakers in her house, which was near the gate and the wall. Secondly, there was a marriage to be made between two persons of quality, where great cheer and rejoicings were to be. Thirdly, they got a woman that carried herbs to sell in the town, and under the herbs the letters were hidden. The author says likewise, that there was a monk and a tradesman, that lodged at this widow's house, those two actors in this business, viz. The monk said tradesman, in secretly to the woman that sold herbs, cave, which signifies take heed. They said these words secretly near Matrone, that is, they whispered in her ear cave. Their design was to betray the town, under pretence of a marriage, but it did not succeed, because the letters in the woman's basket were intercepted. The vulgar impression hath a fault in the third verse, where there is Modine instead of Matrone, and another in the fourth verse, when instead of treason, they have put for betrayed. The history obligeth us to correct it, as we have done. English. The expelled shall come again to the kingdom, her enemies shall be found to be the conspirators, more than ever his time shall triumph, 73 appointed for death. Not. This is a clear and express prediction of the happy restoration of His Sacred Majesty, and our dread Sovereign Charles II. Now reigning, who after a long exile is come again to enjoy his own kingdom, and to flourish more than ever he did before. By these 70 appointed to death, are meant the judges and murderers of his father, who with some few others of the same gang made about that number, and some of which have paid their shot by the hand of public justice, others have prevented their shame by dying beforehand, others have been their own executioners, and those that remain, lead a life worse than death it. Self, so true it is that vengeance dances the round. English. The great pilot shall be sent for by the king, to leave the fleet, and be preferred to a higher place. 7 years after he shall be countermanded, a barbarian army shall put Venice to a fright. Not. This needeth no further explanation. English. The ancient city founded by Antenor, being not able to bear the tyrant any longer, with a faint haft, in the church cut a throat, the people will come to put his servants to death. Not. The city founded by Antenor, who was companion and came into Italy with Aeneas, is Padua, a university of the Venetians, of which it is said here, that being no longer able to bear a tyrant, the said tyrant shall be murdered in the church with a knife hidden in a haft, and all his men and servants killed by the people of the town. English. By the deceitful victory of the deceived, one of the two fleets shall revolt to the Germans, the chief and his son murdered in their tent, Florence, Amoli persecuted in Romania. Not. The 3 first verses are plain. Florence and Emoli are two cities of Italy, seated in the province of Romania. English. They shall cry up the victory of the great Selen's half-moon. By the Romans the eagle shall be claimed. Tyson, Milan and Genoa consent not. Then by themselves the great Basil shall be claimed. Not. The first verse foretelleth some conquests of the Turks, whose arms is the half-moon. The second verse signifies, the Romans shall move the emperor to succor them, which is the eagle. Tyson, Milan and Genoa shall refuse to give help, and afterwards they shall call the great Basil, which in Greek signifies the great king, from beta alpha sigma lambda epsilon upsilon, to their help. English. Near the Tesin the inhabitants of Logar, Garonne and Saône, Seine, Tar and Gironde, shall erect a promontory beyond the mountains, a battle shall be fought, the Po shall be passed over, some shall be drowned in it. Not. Tesin is the river that passeth by Milan. Garonne, Saône, Seine, Tar, and Gironde are rivers of France. Po is the greatest river of Italy. English. The kingdom of Fez shall come to those of Europe, fire and sword shall destroy their city, the great one of Asia by land and sea with a great troop, so that blues, greens, crosses to death he shall drive. Not. This is strange prophecy if it prove true, viz. that the kingdom of Fez, which is in Africa, shall be taken by those of Europe, and the town put to fire and sword, after which the great one of Asia, meaning the great Turk, shall come by land and by sea with an innumerable army, and shall drive and destroy all before him. English. Tears, cries and complaints, howlings, fear, an inhumane heart, cruel, black, astonished, Lehman, the islands the great ones of Genoa, shall spill blood, the bell shall ring out, no mercy shall be given. Not. This foretells bloody wars only, and needs no interpretation. English. Through the deserts of a free and ragged place, the nephew of the Pope shall come to wander, knocked in the head by 7 with a heavy club, by those who after shall obtain the scythe. Not. This signifies that the nephew of a pope shall be driven away, and shall wander in a desert place, where he shall be knocked in the head by 7 men, one of which shall afterwards enjoy the papacy, for scythe is a Latine word, signifying a cup or chalu, such as the Romish priests say Mass with, and take the sacrament. English. He that shall have had so many honours and welcomes, at his going into Flanders, and will after shall commit so many rudenesses, and shall be against the warlike flower. Not. This is positively concerning the Duke of Alençon, brother to Henry III, King of France, who having been sent for by the states of the Low Countries, and received with much honour to be their general and governor against the Spaniard, did most unworthily break his trust, and being come to Antwerp, he was so ravished with the beauty and riches of the town, that he seized upon it for himself, but was beaten out by the citizens, and most of his men killed. The 4th verse saith, he shall be against the warlike flower, that is, his action shall be against military honor, and common practice of honorable soldiers. English. He that Claudius will not have to reign in Sparta, the same shall do so much by a deceitful way, that he shall cause him to be arraigned short and long, as if he had made his prospect upon the king. Not. I believe the words of Claudius and Sparta here are metaphorical, and the author was unwilling they should be known. The sense is, one shall be hindred from reigning by another, whom ye shall accuse of treason against the king. English. The great city of Tharsis shall be taken by the French, all those that were at Turbin shall be made slaves, succours by sea from the great Portugals, the first day of the summer, and of the installation of Urban. Not. Here are 2 difficulties in this stanza. The first is, what the author means by the great city Tharsis. The second is in the last verse, what he meaneth by the installation of Verban. I believe he meaneth no more than the election of a pope, whose name shall be Urban. English. The great prelate the next day after his dream, interpreted contrary to his sense, from Gascony shall come to him a monge, that shall cause the great prelate of Sens to be elected. Not. Monge is a barbarous word, that hath no relation to any language in the world, that I know, unless it signifies a monk. Sens is a fine city, about 60 miles beyond Paris, towards the south, and the seat of an archbishop, who at seemeth shall be elected into some eminent place. The next day after he that was in it shall dream a dream, that shall be interpreted contrary to the sense and meaning of it. English. The election made at Frankfurt shall be void, Milan shall oppose it, he of the Milan party shall be so strong as to drive the other beyond the marshes of the Rhine. Not. The election of Frankfurt is concerning an emperor, for there they are elected, crowned. The rest is plain. English. A great kingdom shall be left desolate, near the river Hebrus an assembly shall be made, the Pyrenean mountains shall comfort him, when in May shall be an earthquake. Not. This needeth no interpretation, but what any one may give that knoweth where the river Hebrus is. English. Between two boats one shall be tied hand and foot, his face anointed with honey, and he nourished with milk. Wasps and bees shall make much of him in anger, for being treacherous cupbearers, and poisoning the cup. Not. This is a description of the punishment which the Persians used to afflict upon poisoners, for they were put between two troughs, which are here called boats, from their likeness to them, with their face only uncovered, which was daubed with honey, that the wasps and bees might be drawn to it and torment them. They were fed with milk, which if they refused to do, and had rather die than be so tormented, then did the tormentor prick their eyes with needles to force them to their diet, and so were they left, till the vermin eat them up. We have an example of this in the life of Artaxerxes, king of Persia. English. The stinking and abominable defiling after the secret shall succeed well, the great one shall be excused for not being favorable, that Neptune might be persuaded to peace. Not. By the two first verses it seemeth that some abominable action, after its effect shall succeed well, the two last signify, that a great person shall be excused for not permitting the fleet to be at peace. English. The leader of the naval forces, red, rash, severe, horrible extortioner, being slave, shall escape, hidden amongst the harnesses, when a son named Agrippa shall be born to the great one. Not. This needeth no interpretation, the words being so plain. English. A princess of an exquisite beauty shall be brought to the general, the second time the fact shall be betrayed, the city shall be given to the sword and fire, by too great a murder the chief person about the king shall be hated. Not. The only difficulty lies in what city he doth mean. English. A covetous prelate, deceived by ambition, shall do nothing but covet too much, his messengers and he shall be trapped, when they shall see one cleave the wood the contrary way. Not. This needeth no annotation. English. A king shall be angry against the covenant breakers, when the warlike armor shall be forbidden, the poison with sugar shall be put in the strawberries, they shall be murdered and die, saying, Close, close. Not. The words are plain. English. The youngest son shall be calumniated by a slanderer, when enormous and martial deeds shall be done, the least part shall be left doubtful to the eldest, and soon after they shall be both equal in the kingdom. Not. This lacketh no interpretation. English. A great city shall be given up to the soldiers, there was never a mortal tumult so near, oh! What a hideous calamity draws near, except one offense nothing shall be spared. Not. This is concerning the taking of the town of St. Quentin in 1557. Because the author saith, no tumult was like this, so near the year 1555. When our author writ, he calleth it great city, because it is one of the most considerable in France, therefore it was besieged by the King of Spain with 37,000 men, and 12,000 horses, and 8,000. English. The plunder was given to the soldiers, for it was taken by assault. There was never a mortal tumult so near, for the soldiers taking revenge upon the inhabitants, and garrison, put all to the sword, the admiral having much ado to save himself. In consequence of this our prophet crieth, Oh, what a fearful calamity, because the taking of this town joined with the loss of St. Lawrence did almost ruin France. He addeth, except one offense nothing shall be forgiven, that is, the town should be afflicted in all respects, except that it should not be burnt. The taking of this town was upon the 27th of August, 17 days after the Battle of St. Lawrence. The loss was so great to France, that the king was fain to call the Duke of Guise back from Italy, and Charles V, hearing this news, asked presently if his son Philip was not in Paris, as much as to say, it was a thing he ought to have done. But God permitted that the King of Spain went another way, and in the meantime, the King of France strengthened himself, and the Duke of Guise took from the English, Calais, Guines, and the county of Diois. The Spanish history saith, that Philip had forbidden to touch any old people, children and ecclesiastical persons, but above all St. Quintin's relics. English. The heaven shall burn at 45 degrees, the fire shall come near the great new city, in an instant a great flame dispersed shall burst out, when they shall make a trial of the Normans. Anat. This signifies some extraordinary lightning under 45 degrees, which is about the southern part of France. It is not easy to guess what he meaneth by the great new city, unless it be one in the author's country, called Villa Nova. The last verse seemeth to intimate that this shall happen when an army of Normandy shall be raised. English. A ruin shall happen to the Volsques that are so terrible, their great city shall be dyed, a pestilent deed, they shall plunder sun and moon, and violate their temples, and the 2 rivers shall be red with running blood. Anat. The Volsci were a warlike people of Italy joining to Rome, which makes me believe that by the great city he meaneth Rome, which was plundered and sacked by the Duke of Burgundy and the Prince of Orange, generals of the Emperor Charles V. English. The learned enemy shall go back confounded, a great camp shall be sick, and in effect through ambush, the Pyrenean mountains shall refuse him. Near the river, discovering the ancient hives. Anat. The words are plain, though the sense be too obscure, and I shall not endeavor to give an interpretation, when every one may make one himself. English. Daughter of Laura, sanctuary of the sick, where to the heavens is seen the amphitheatre, a prodigy being seen, the danger is near, thou shalt be taken captive above 4 times. Anat. This is an ingenious stanza, concerning the city of Nimes in Languedoc, famous for its amphitheatre built by the Romans, and remaining to this day, which town he calleth daughter of Laura, because the lady Laura, mistress to the famous poet Petrarch, was born thereabout. He also calleth it sanctuary of the sick, for the salubrity of the air. The meaning of the 2 last verses is, that when a prodigy shall be seen, viz. Civil war in France, it shall be taken above 4 times, as it hath happened by one party or other.